Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Namaste viewers, welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA and Jaipur Dialogue. Today we are going to talk about the role of Dharma in today's world. And it is very important for us to understand that. But before we commence the show, I wanted to greet all viewers a very happy Ram Navami. It's an important day for all of us in India, especially Hindus, and Mr. Ram has a very significant place in our life. Today, we are going to discuss this point, and we have two wonderful guests, very young millennials, Mr. Suraj Balakrishnan, whom you can see here, and the second gentleman is known as the Indic explorer, T-I-E, Thai. He has requested for anonymity for reasons of, for a variety of reasons. Primary of importance of them being is the fact that he wants to remain anonymous because of job and other requirements. Having said that, I wanted to start this conversation with an observation made by a gentleman, Vibhuti V. He says, none of them are dharmic scholars, so why are they discussing this topic? Where is Sanjay Dikshit ji when he is needed? All right, good point. We don't claim to be a dharmic scholar. We are talking about an issue because Dharma has been one of the key milestones or key foundations of Hindu way of life. And everybody talks about Dharma, but hardly anybody understands it. Do we have clarity for that? And we as aware individuals, and I can claim that we have a little bit of an elevated consciousness, a little bit of an elevated awareness, we want to talk about it. With the world beset and bedeviled with so many conflicts. So, Suraj, your name is Suraj, and I wanted you to throw light on it.
First of all, Vibhuti ji, happy Ram Navami to you as well. And of course, in other news, congratulations for your nomination on a Republican ticket for the state elections in New York, come November. So, everyone is hoping that, I'm sure the entire Jaipur Dialogue family is hoping that you come up trumps and, you become one of the, another Indo-Americans who are, voted into the American legislature or the broad forms of American legislature, as we call it. So congrats to you on the nomination. Hope to see you, win come November.
Thank you.
But, coming to this topic, and your viewer is absolutely correct. I mean, who am I? Who is Indic? Who's, even you for that matter, to talk about Dharma? Because, if you talk about Sanatana Dharma, the eternal Dharma, as we like to call it, there are so many facets to it. There's so many dimensions to it, right? So, for any person who is, below, 40, or even anyone who just goes about their daily life, it's very difficult to, kind of pinpoint on exactly what is Dharma. But here I want to talk about, my understanding of it as a millennial, as you mentioned, as a layman, as a citizen, is if effectively I look at Dharma, if you want to look at, the definition of Dharma, so to say, it's effectively what? It's the, the religious and the moral law, right? The law governing our individual conduct, about how we present ourselves, to our family, to the world around us. But for that, it also requires a deeper conscience of what exactly is the environment around us, right? I mean, we can always say that, okay, I should behave like this to this person, or, at a workplace, or to my society, to my country, or even to the world, so to speak. But then what exactly is happening around us? How many of us really know, right? So that, I think, is a much deeper issue, which, we can delve into, but it really requires a much, a bigger setting, a deeper setting, and more time, in fact, to discuss it. But effectively, when we look at Dharma, I mean, what is Dharma? It is effectively how we, a Dharma can be how a Raja behaves to his Praja, how, a ruler or, a public servant behaves to, the citizens, or, to his Praja, so to say. Or, of course, how a monarch looks at, subjects. And it could be, again, from a husband to a wife to a husband, a citizen to a, to his deity, etc., etc. So Dharma is in many, respects how we look at life and our obligations, our fulfillment, individual fulfillment to society, and, how we look at our daily life. So it's a deep issue, and the beauty of this issue is that it transcends everything else, right? That's why it's called Sanatana Dharma, the eternal life, as we say. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you and Indic have to say, and thanks for having me again.
Thank you. Thank you for a good opening score that you did with your start. But important part here is that dharma is essentially about your karma. Good dharma, good karma in doing what is right for individual, family, community, and the universe. That's what is important about that. And it is embedded in Vedic way of life. And Vedic way of life is back to Sanatana Dharma practices. So, Indic Explorer, what is your thought on it? How does Dharma will play an important role in today's world? Relevance of it. Please do say.
Yeah. So I want to give my personal understanding of what Dharma is through a small story or a parable, which is basically in the Mahabharata at the end of the war. When Yudhishthir and the other four brothers with Draupadi, they are ascending a mountain, where they are all going towards paradise. And one by one, each brother and Draupadi starts falling down, and they perish. And there's a dog who joins Yudhishthir during this ascent, and who's there with him throughout this journey upwards. And he reaches the top, and Indra greets him there, and he says, "Yeah, the gates of paradise will open for you." And Yudhishthir says, "Yeah, that's great." And then Indra is like, "But this dog is very weak. It's very thin. It's not going to come. It's only you who is allowed inside." So Yudhishthir says that that's impossible. This dog was there throughout my journey. I'm not going to abandon this dog, right at the end. And that is when that dog that was there with Yudhishthir transforms into Dharma, the god, like the Dharma Putra Yudhishthir. So, and Indra greets him that, the way you handled yourself, your conduct throughout your life, and even at this juncture where you had the gates of paradise open to you and you still held that principle at such high value. I think that is the foundation, that story to my mind as a young student of Hinduism. I think that story really rings true. And the other part of, the dharmic philosophy, and I'm going to lay a little bit of philosophical context to this conversation, that I really liked is the concept of Anekantvad, which comes from Jainism, another fellow dharmic religion, which is, when there are these 7 blind men who touch different parts of the elephant. Somebody's pulling the ear, somebody's pulling on the tail, and they can't see the elephant. But they can just feel that elephant from different parts. And for each of them, the perception of that elephant is very different. The elephant is only one. In this particular example, it's the manifestation of divinity, but each person experiences that elephant differently. So I think the pluralistic understanding of dharma and this righteousness, rightful duty, I feel like dharma is like this, generally speaking, philosophies have some kind of ethical contract, social contract with either the creator or with society. But in Hinduism, it's like an understanding with the divine, which manifests itself in society, in your interactions with your family, in how you run the state, in how you conduct yourself as an individual. So that is how I see, the essential features of dharma. And
No, that's very fine, and we are all on an individual journey. Individual in our way of life is many individuals make a community, right? So each individual, like as you very rightly mentioned in that example of 7 people, 7 blind men touching the elephant and feeling it in a different way, they have different ideas. That's what individual expression is all about. However, let's focus on one important element of that. It is the world is full of conflict. How does one use dharmic traditions and dharmic way of life to reduce conflicts? Because we can talk about millions of items on the planet Earth today which is in conflict. Everybody seems to be in conflict, hypertension, stressed out. And in conflict, with everything and everybody, individually and together. How does the dharmic way of life eliminate or reduce the stress and the tensions of life? Suraj.
So easy answer to that question, but I think we touched upon karma, right? I think Indic and both yourself as well touched upon karma, and which is so, closely linked with the dharmic aspect that we talk about. And I want to go back to Rishi Valmiki's, Ramayana, and where, or even Bhagavad Gita for that matter. When you look at Arjun's dilemma, in that conversation with Krishna about what he has to do in the battlefield, and the emotion that he's going through. And if you look at, coming or taking a side step to the Ramayana, why do we regard, Lord Purushottam, Ram as the Maryada Purushottam, or the ideal man? About what he did in terms of both, his dharma, as we say, or, as in terms of his karma as well, in terms of after his wife was abducted, him taking care of his brother, his close friends, and of course his children as well, going to Lanka, defeating, Ravana, and getting Sita back, and, coming back and living a, fulfilling life in Ayodhya, and eventually literally dying in the, while bathing in the Saryu River, right? So if you look at Ramayana and if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, they give you a good sense of, the dharmic traditions, and especially if you, look at life in a microscope of Lord Ram's life, what he went through in the Ramayana, and, how he lived his life. That's a good way to, go about it. Because why is he called the Maryada Purushottam? Because he, he was given the ultimate test, right? The ultimate test of being banished, of Banyas, of, going to, seeing his wife kidnapped, of going to Lanka, a foreign place, and bringing her back. And then, of course, making sure that his subjects, in Ayodhya had a, great, a life and a great, livelihood and a means of, going about their daily chores. So in that sense, if you go to see, to answer your question about, getting, making sure that everything around you, the conflicts around the world, in our country, even, in terms of whether it's ethnic strife, whether it is, geographical strife, religious strife, whatever it is, there's no easy answer to that question, but ultimately we can learn a lot from, Lord Ram's life and the Ramayana as we know it. And that's a good stepping stone to start off from there.
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic that needs more discussion, and probably, bring in some scholars as well. But in terms of pure knowledge, understanding at a rudimentary level, at a very basic level, there is a thing called, I personally feel that Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana teaches us the dharmic way of life is a duty, it's a responsibility, it's a commitment. And what you notice is that people who rise above, they are saved from degradation and deprivation of life. There are people who go above that, and some people lead that life. So Indic, please tell us, in your opinion, and we are not scholars, we'll emphasize that point again, but we are discussing this matter as educated, aware, and conscious people. What makes one dharmic? Would you like to throw light on that, Indic?
Yeah, and this also to some extent answers your previous questions as to how you will deal with conflict as well. I think one of the very important aspects of dharmic philosophy is this, this perennial question of free will versus fate. Fate. And most philosophies try to answer this question from a standpoint that which one supersedes the other. There have been schools of philosophies which have also said that fate, which are more fatalistic. But the dharmic answer to this is that all life is an interplay of free will and fate. Where you start is something that you can't control, but where you end up at the end is to a large extent in your control. So a dharmic person has to acknowledge that there are certain things, that strengths and weaknesses that you would have based on your gunas, etc., in the beginning. But then how you build on that through your actions and how you change the outcome is what counts the most. That is one thing that a dharmic person should know. And the other thing is this thing of self discipline. You know, in dharma there is no orthodoxy, it's an orthopraxy. Practice is more important than belief. You know, what you actually show through your actions is far more important than what you actually believe in. In fact, there are some schools of thought which completely discount belief to the point that actions are the ultimate thing. Of course, this varies from schools to schools. Uh, and for a dharmic person, uh, dharma does not stop at any point in their life. You know, the way they look at different facets of their life, dharma has a role to play. You know, for example, there is this book called Natya Shastra, which talks about dance form, right? Now, strictly from a modernist interpretation, people would look at it as a way in which you conduct plays and dance and drama and all of that. But that is not how Bharat Muni actually thought of it. He conceived of it as a form through which he can express, you know, his dharmic principles. It was like the play was an expression of his dharma. So basically, whatever work you do, you try to stick to those dharmic principles and understand and realize that you focus on the actions, the results will come. I think that is the essential sar of the Gita itself. You know, that you focus on what what you need to do rather than the end result, which can cloud your judgment sometimes. That is what a dharmic person would be like.
I agree with that. One of the thoughts that you shared, that it doesn't matter how many times you pray, but what you do that actually defines you. And it is very, very important to bear in mind. As a rule of housekeeping, I just wanted to make an announcement here. This show is sponsored by Mr. Harish Shahni. He lives in New York. He's a good friend of mine, and he has been supporting our show for a while. Thank you, Arishji, and welcome to the show. The other part which I also wanted to request all the viewers, like, subscribe, and support us. We are trying to bring about a change in narrative, a righteous narrative to what life ought to be on the planet Earth. It's, we all go through our stress and strains. How do we manage conflict? What is the responsibility? Now, the question here is again very important. Is it tough to be dharmic? Is it tough to follow dharma? And I will bring it to a very layman's scenario here. And Suraj, I would like you to attempt at that. Because I find, to give a very rudimentary example, it's so easy to live in your own comfort zone, right? It's very easy to live in your own comfort zone. Doing good things is tougher in life. Putting on weight, as an example, is the easiest thing in the world can do. But losing weight is so tough. Watching 3 hours of movie, a football match, or a movie is easy on TV. It's so tough to do a meditation in the same time. But we always make that kind of adjustment that we'll do it tomorrow. Is it tough to be dharmic? That's a question. That is an inquiry in my mind, because I will share my experience of how easy it is if only you commit to do that. Suraj, your take on it.
I agree with the last part of what you said, and I was actually a bit bedazzled by the initial part of the question. It's not tough to be dharmic. It's in fact one of the easiest things that you really can do. But on the other side, when you talk about examples, very simple examples like weight loss, like maintaining a good lifestyle, etc. Yes, like I can tell you about myself. After school, I always had this habit of sleeping very late, till this day, and by the same time, when I had to get up in terms of certain work commitments or some other things that I had to get up in the morning, whether it's to play a sport or go to the gym, do some meditation, I managed to do it. Like when I want to do it, I can do it. So I think, and that effectively is again a microcosm of life, isn't it? Microcosm of life of dharma. If you want to do something, it's very easy. You just have to put your heart, your soul, and your mind in that. It's not difficult at all. But at the same time, again, we have to go back to the old thing what we talked about. How much of a priority is weight loss for you as an individual? How much of a priority is getting into good habits? maybe for some people it's not. And again, that's the beauty of Sanatana Dharma, isn't it? It doesn't. This is not an Abrahamic tradition of saying that you have to follow the book. Book tells you to do something, you will do it. We're not, we're not a land. We're not people who are enforcers. We are a land of seekers. We are ultimately, if you follow Dharma, if you are, believe in Sanatana Dharma, what is that? I mean, you're ultimately seeking things. You're always seeking knowledge. You're seeking, wisdom. You're seeking, more fountains and fountains of new information. You're not. No one is enforcing on you that okay, you have to do this show. You have to get up at this time. You have to pray 5 times or 10 times a day. Nobody's enforcing. So that again is in a way the beauty of Sanatana Dharma. But coming to your direct question, is it tough to be dharmic? Honestly, it's not. I mean, if I can tell you that if 3 of us today put our heart and minds to the fact that we have to get up at 5:30 tomorrow morning, we will get up at exactly 5:30. Exactly 5:30 in the morning. We won't be a second late. We could be early, but we won't be a second late. So, and going beyond such certain rudimentary things, it's just in terms of life, like in terms of maybe controlling your temper, in terms of like I had a temper, I can say, like 3-4 years back. I mean, now I don't know when the last time I actually lost my cool. I mean, like really lost my cool, right? So if you look in terms of very very rudimentary aspects of life, it's honestly not tough to be dharmic at all. You can imbibe dharma in your daily life. You can imbibe dharma as literally a way of life. And again, as we mentioned, the same old thing of karma. We had a lot of if you look at our political history, right from, it's not about Vajpayee ji or Mr. Modi or Amit Shah. If you go back to a time of independence, it was Mohandas Gandhi, after all, who repeatedly said, "I want to see a Bharat of Ram Rajya, which practices Ram Rajya." So in that sense, Dharma literally goes beyond time, beyond generations. It is not tough, Vibhuti ji, to be dharmic in any way. You can imbibe it and you can flourish it.
I totally agree with you, Suraj. It is not difficult to be good. The question is, how do you sustain it? As a practicing meditator, people have asked me this question: what does meditation do to you? Because it has impact on various people in a different way. For me, my response is that it allows me to retain my sanity in an otherwise insane world. The point which I'm trying to make is, yes, it is easy provided we learn to practice and follow it, regardless of the what you call the environmental impact, because environment is full of imperfections of its own. So Indic, I'm coming back with the same question to you.
Yeah.
Do you feel it is tough to be dharmic, to be doing good in a sustained manner, since we live in a remarkably imperfect world?
Yeah. So the world, yes, is imperfect, but it's a very interesting example that Suraj mentioned. So, how I would look at, how I would dissect it is, again, from the point of view of not looking at the end result, but focusing on the process. How easy or difficult it is will depend on how you go about, what approach or mindset you have. If I have to get up at 5 a.m. in the morning, what do I need to change right now to make that happen? It has to become so organic that it becomes second nature. Rather than focusing on 5 a.m., I'm focusing right now in the evening. What do I need to do for that? What are the things that need to fall in place right now for the final result to come? I think that when you focus on the action, the immediate action required, that automatically makes you reach your goal effortlessly. That effortlessness comes with practice, obviously, but I think that is the mindset change that is required. And there's another, adding to the point that Suraj mentioned, right? There's no definitive right and wrong way. Like, everyone is a seeker. Everyone has to find their own path. And one very differential hallmark of the dharmic religions is that lived experience governs the philosophy, in the sense that the book or the codification of any philosophy is the last step in the development of the philosophy. The philosophy has evolved over practice in ashrams and forests and all of that, through action, and then the final output has come. no rishi was focusing on making the final output. They were actually living their lives in a dharmic way, and the output automatically came. You know what I mean? So when that happens, and even when these books were written, like whether it's Ramanuja and Shankara as well, they often say that lived experience is more important. Texts, yes, that's great, that is important, the adhikara is there, but it all comes through lived experience. It's the articulation of the lived experience of all these great philosophers and people that we've seen. So I think focusing on that action rather than the result automatically makes things easy, is how I can answer that question.
Yeah, it is more of it. It is a conversation we are trying to discuss a very important topic, because living in this country, in America, with dharma being the part of life, people do ask us to explain. Now, each one of us cannot go to a scholar to get an answer, but we have to know ourselves. As a seeker, we need to know ourselves because we do it. It's a very interesting somatic experience of our life. Whatever we read in the books, if our body doesn't imbibe it, it doesn't matter, because it is actually everything that we learn, whether it's a driving, playing tennis, shooting, or doing whatever. It's an imbibed practice. It's an embodied competence of a human body. So if we do not learn the wisdom and implement it through our body, it doesn't matter then. Just having a tennis racket in my hand doesn't make me a tennis player. But there is another important element I wanted to touch upon. It's a favorite thought of mine, that we humans are evolved life forms. In our scriptures, they say that human beings are the evolved life form. We exercise our choices. We exercise choice in our life and living. Animals don't have that choice. A lion is a buffalo eater or a meat eater. Elephant will never become a meat eater, or a lion will not become a milk drinker or whatever. This is what is important to learn from nature, because in nature, everything is defined and given. And lions don't go to a beauty parlor, nor do they go to a health clinic. We do, because we are living an imperfect life. How do we take that? What do we learn from the natural world, nature that is there? Well, that's what Sanatan practice is all about. I'm trying to bring the conversation to a grassroots level, where a daily conversation can help. How do we exercise our choice to make our life what it is, what it can be, and what it is not? Your thoughts, Suraj?
What you mentioned was very interesting at the start. You mentioned about how humans are evolving, right, as opposed to animals who might have a different setting because the idiots that we humans are, we encroach on their land, we take away their land, we make it difficult for them to inhabit their own habitats of old, and they have to move to new habitats. But I think that is an important aspect of not just us humans, but also about dharma, right? So, I mean, no one says that dharma is the same, like your dharma or my dharma is the same right now on 10th April 2022, what it was, say, of our ancestors, say, in the 19th century or the 18th century. Our surroundings are different, our environment is different, our goals are different. I mean, can you imagine even 100 years back, that all of us would have cars to kind of drive around, or bikes. We would have, society, industry has kind of developed so much, both the the service industry, the manufacturing, and everything that's around you, and our way of life. Right now, you have a table, you have chairs to sit on and eat, or of course you can sit on the ground as well. But our way of life, our surroundings, our goals, both in terms of our personal objectives, what we want to achieve professionally or in a personal way, but also in terms of just convenience around you. I mean, is it really practical to take a bullock cart or a cycle and travel 30 kilometers every day to go to work? I'm not so sure. So in that sense, dharma is a very evolving concept, and that's I think what you touched upon the big opening part of your comment. So nothing is static, right? I mean, one of my favorite quotes about life is, the only thing constant about life is change today, right? There's nothing else constant about it. We are all evolving as humans. We are all changing, and this thing that I have in my hand right now is making us change even more. I mean, that the tablet, the phone, we don't know what's going to happen even 15 years from now, we could, be talking to each other in a completely different setting. Just in forget 15, even 5 years from now. So technology is making the way around us, our world, our existence, very very different. So dharma is very very evolving. It's a thing which is really fluctuating and it's changing every day. So we have to evolve, as human beings as well, as opposed to say animals to a degree, in that respect. But that's again where we come to sanatana dharma. Sanatana dharma would be what I like to say the eternal dharma. That doesn't change. So that again is where we kind of stay static, or we say grounded as as human beings, as opposed to just dharma, which along with of course what our Vedas teaches us, moksha, and the other forms, karma, and the other forms which give, tell us the means to a good life, to a satisfactory life, and to fulfilled life. So in that sense, I think Vibhuti ji, to answer your question, we have to evolve as human beings. There's no set there, where we have to kind of remain rigid to our, to a certain way of conduct, because, we could be talking, three of us, maybe even 2 years from now, 2 years after this, and, we could be in a completely different setting, in terms of, it may not be YouTube, may not be StreamYard, it could be something, something completely different. So we have to evolve, and that in many ways is what even Sanatana Dharma, our scriptures have, taught us to, to seek, to always imbibe new things and to progress, as again, as opposed to certain desert cults or certain Abrahamic faiths, which again teach you to be blindly believe a book and to follow that book blindly. So that's again the beauty of where our thought process comes from.
I totally agree with you, and that's very you touched upon two very important things: is that evolving, growing. Like yesterday we were traveling by bullock carts and bikes. Now we fly. We have faster equipments, and as you showed your iPhone or whatever smartphone you are using, there is no more mainframe required to run your computers. You run your life like that. But Indic, I wanted to ask you something. It's very important. As we have developed, we have emitted so much CO2 that climate change has become a problem. And since dharmic way is related with Sanatan Dharma, how do you think the practice of Sanatan Dharma and dharmic way of life can supposedly help ameliorate the climate environment that is getting so much more polluted? And that's very important. There are two issues related to that. One is the way we consume food, population growth. There are two things are very interrelated. The way we consume food and the way we are polluting the earth, population growth. There was a time, I see the pictures of Mumbai or New York in 1930s, 1950s, 1970s, you feel, oh my God, it couldn't have been like that. When you compare it with today's time, it is crowded, and everywhere. We call Mother Earth, but the increasing population is impacting the use of resources. And that's what is affecting the environment. So, for example, the Millennium Project itself said that livestock emits anything between 14 to 18.5% of the total greenhouse effect. And the transportation sector itself releases about over 14% of the greenhouse effect. How do we balance that as aware, conscious people, as we have access to science and technology? How do we address that challenge? How can dharmic Sanatani way of life bring about balance in nature? Indic.
Yeah. So, very interesting question. And, again, there is this principle of punya kamna, like basically some actions that you do for the mistakes that you've done, right? It's if you take it allegorically and you compare it against carbon credits, what exactly is that? You pollute the environment so much that you then probably plant trees or take corrective actions to kind of correct those wrong actions that you have taken. And I think the application of dharmic principle in this particular problem would be that uh, dharmic chronology, the dharmic conception of time, is circular. Now, many people obviously kind of contrast this against linear time and all of that. But in my view, circular time is not opposite of linear time. It's kind of aggregative in the sense that a circle has infinite straight lines that connect, each other. So what that means is when you keep coming back because of your karmic actions, you keep taking rebirth and keep coming back, in this life. The way you leave this planet, the way in which you conceive about how you should leave this planet is very different vis-a-vis if you only will have one life. In that sense, you would be very gluttonous, you would just go right out, exploit the environment, pollute the air, pollute the water supply and all of that. But when you know that you have to leave एक धरोहर छोड़नी है अगले generation के लिए, for the next generation, there has to be something for them to live in as well, right? When you have, because that is the thing with dharma, with rights there are responsibilities, there are duties. So how do you leave the earth the better place at the end of your life is a very important thing. So when you do those wrong actions, you have to take corrective measures to right them first. Second, whatever future action you take once you've become dharmically conscious, you have to ensure that it is aligned, that you don't pollute the environment, that you eat clean, organic, healthy food. Obviously, these things will not be definitive. Like, for example, if you look recently in Sri Lanka, there was a huge food crisis, and a lot of it was perpetuated because they tried to adopt hardcore organic farming, like, which obviously will drop your productivity levels. So you can't feed your entire population, right? So there has to be a balance that has to be maintained. Santulan banana zaruri hai. That is what you need to ensure, the balance of your universe. Whatever you take from the universe, you have to give it back. I think with that mindset, you will be able to handle the environmental context in a much more clearer fashion.
Thank you very much. I wanted to also switch to other kind of a conversation of the modern times. We are seeing so much conflict. Look at our neighboring country. Look at what is happening in Ukraine. Look at the sanctions on Russia, but no sanction on China. But there are people, the governments, the way they control their affairs. Where is the just balance? You use the word balance, Indic. How do we bring about balance and fair play in a conduct of this kind of an international disorder? I'm reminded of the famous movie Sherlock Holmes and the Games of Shadows. In Professor Moriarty says that the human mind is so much full of conflict that all that matters is whether you are supplying bullets or bandages. That's the thought that I'm having. How do we reduce the conflict of this magnitude in which hundreds and thousands of people are dying? So much destruction is happening for a political ambition. Where does dharma come into play in this kind of scenario? Suraj, you take the first shot at that.
Look at what the ground report says that in this Ukraine-Russia conflict, roughly 14,000, anywhere between 13,000 and 14,000 Ukrainians have died. It could be civilians, it could be soldiers. And on the other hand, Ukraine, of course, claims that 19,000 Russian soldiers have died, while the Russian, foreign ministry claims that around 2,000, 1,950 odd, Russian soldiers have been killed in this conflict. And you mentioned about Pakistan, and it's always been. I mean, there's a reason why we call it the most dangerous place on the planet, right? Not just now, but over the last 4-5 years as well, considering the APAC region and the chaos and the geopolitics that goes on there, and the amount of terrorists that have been harbored there, and of course who have laid havoc to different parts of the world there as well. Dharma is it's funny about dharma because very often at least in my generation when we've grown up, we've always been taught that we live in a unipolar world, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, we're all hum sab saath hai, hum saath saath hai, our old age-old wisdom. And then, of course, we had, the Cold War time when we literally lived in a bipolar world. You had the Western Bloc, you had the Soviet Bloc. But now, effectively, what is happening, and I'll allude to dharma, to the dharmic aspect as well. Effectively, right now, it is every country, every culture for itself. Let's face it. I mean, you have the dharmic forces, whether you want to say, about India, about, our Akhanda Bharat, as we like to say, in terms of Sri Lanka, in terms of, Southeast Asian nations, and of course, Bhutan and Nepal, who effectively, follow one or the other way of dharma, whether it is, Hinduism, so to say, or Buddhism, or the dharmic religions. Then, of course, you have the Confucius, way of life in terms of, Chinese and the ancient culture of China, and their the vision of the world that they see, especially Xi Jinping, says in terms of the modern day China, in terms of the geography, and of course you have Taiwan and the other aspects, and then of course you have the Soviet blocs, you have the West, you have other countries like South America, who again have their own way of thinking. So the world is right now divided into many blocks. There's no one. I mean, gone are the days. It's far away when the US or the West, as a NATO bloc, or as Western Europe plus America, could dictate to the world how to live life, and they would literally put sanctions there, and all the other countries would be shitting in their pants about how to kind of deal with those sanctions. And Russia has effectively shown in the last 2 weeks or the last 1 month how to kind of deal with USA and use them and defeat them in their own game, right? And China is, again, whether we like them or not, have done that quite successfully over the last 10 decades, both in terms of their military might and also in terms of, more than that, their economic might. So effectively, in terms of dharma, I think we can look at a lot of the dharmic aspects, the karma that we touched upon repeatedly in the show, about living a good life, not worrying about the result or what your objective or your material objective is, but just enjoying the process, living life to the full, at the same time respecting the environment around you, respecting the the world around you, both in terms of your immediate neighborhood, also your country, the world around you, and trying to live as one big happy family. Ironically, that one big happy family, the Vasundhara Kutumbakam that we like to say, that's not really happening in terms of the ground reality, the ground aspect that we are seeing in in AFPAC region, or in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war. But that's something that we can look up to in a utopian environment, utopian setting. But the world is becoming really multipolar right now. That's the harsh reality of life.
You brought in the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in the family. In my interpretation alone is the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam doesn't mean the world is a family. The world is a community. And what is the world community? What the community as the world mean? I think Prime Minister Modi gave a fabulous definition, a modern definition, to the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam when he was inaugurating the International Solar Alliance. And that was brilliantly said. He said, there is one sun, there is one earth, and there is one grid, right? That's the modern interpretation of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, because in the mother nature, in the earth, the universe, we have one moon, same planets, we have the same earth, and we utilize Mother Earth's resources. So, sun doesn't discriminate against anybody, air doesn't discriminate against anybody, water doesn't discriminate against anybody, fire is the same for everybody, and so is ether. The 5 elements is common to every universal element of the earth. That's the true meaning of in my interpretation of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We are all one. I mean, now genome research has proved that as human beings, also our DNA is the same. It's not only Hindu-Muslim DNA, but the entire life cycle DNA is the same, right? So the question here is very important, that talking about the conflicts and the family part you mentioned again. Family is a remarkably discordant unit. It's if you and I begin to believe, there is a thing called sibling rivalry. The history is full of brothers killing brothers to attain the throne. Internecine and conflicts have always existed, isn't it? So the family is we work a lot with the families, Children fight for ancestral wealth. People fight for differences. So that separate units are created. So family is a concept that has to be treated very gingerly and very carefully. Once you get married, brothers get married, they have a separate entity. So coming to the question is, again, in the remaining time that we have, I also wanted to touch upon Indic. I wanted you to share your thoughts that we Dharmic values that we have talked about of austerity, purity, compassion, respect, unique, they're combinations of elements of dharma. How does this how do we carry these values to the next generation of youth? That's very important. They are living in a very, very different era. As you rightly said, Suraj, we are living in a very discordant era where everybody is trying to blow his own torch or blow horn. Indic, your thought. How do we carry this message to the young generation? I have great faith in the youth. I have great faith in the two of you. Uh, we are no longer that young. The value systems, how do you carry this forward to your children and to yourselves and to the millennials? Indic.
That's a very interesting question, and also because a lot of people say this, that especially a lot of dharmic youngsters, many people are getting deracinated, and I think this is the most pivotal question for all dharmics to answer as to how dharma should interact with modernity, because kids being kids are rebellious, and whenever there is an established order of things, there is usually a way to rebel against that. And at a young age, there are a lot of hormonal changes that happen as well, so there is a lot of emotional upheaval. I think it's very important, and also from the dharmic point of view, the transmission of dharmic knowledge, actually, because there are no institutional structures like other religions. There is no person to kind of spread the word as such, and it really requires the lived experience to go from one generation to other. So if at one particular generation that transmission breaks, then automatically the link of dharma breaks from there, right? So this intergenerational transmission is a very, very important part for dharma to sustain, to thrive, to remain alive. So I think the institution of family in whatever modified version, like it used to be a joint family before, now it's a nuclear family, it's a very important thing. Like many people say, oh, the school should impart all the dharmic knowledge, education, etc. But to some extent, maybe if it's a temple run school, something like that, when temples can run schools eventually, when that day comes, something like that can happen. But what is important to understand is the local, like every family has some localized tradition of the Kul Devta, the Gram Devta, which only that family would have very uniquely to it, right? How will you transmit that through any form of the normal institutional framework? So I think that is where some amount of dharmic literacy is required on the part of the parents, and there is some responsibility in the family unit. At the same time, I think accessing local like institutions, like for example Chinmaya Mission or ISKCON, or even Arya Samaj, they have their own programs, and many of these are now even available online, and that is where digital technology is our biggest ally. It's just that when this is presented to the kids, what is very important is it is presented as something that is in a very digestible format, in a cool, in a fun way, so that it can, like I had a friend who used to play crossword puzzles, on the Mahabharata, different characters of the Mahabharata written in a crossword, and things like that. You can have snakes and ladders with different bad characters pulling you down and good characters taking you. You can make it more fun and casual. In a casual environment, the kid gets to kind of relax, and also then can easily assimilate and digest those complicated concepts. So I think there is a very important role for family to some extent, because of the longer family institution not being as strong now, especially in urban areas, because previously the grandparents used to play that role, because the parents were actively working somewhere, so they could not spend the same amount of time. So the grandparents, at least a lot of the dharma that I know, whatever little I know, comes from my grandparents. So now that responsibility doubles up on the parents, and they have to take that seriously. Apart from that, also I think, apart from this early age, even youngsters, I know groups in India which actually run Mahabharata tellings. And just tell me how you think about it. Like Mahabharata readings and discussions in cafes. And a lot of youngsters come there, with a coffee mug in hand, and they talk about what they know. And obviously all of them are students, so they go there, they talk, they share ideas, and well, they hear, the Mahabharata is something which every time you have a discussion you learn something new. So I think these kind of social validations that you get, right, is very important at that age. So when that is happening with other youngsters, uh, I know there is this Jewish youth group which actually organizes treks and expeditions to ancient places of Jewish antiquity. Why can't there be a trek organized to a fort or a Hindu temple on top of a small hill? And people light a bonfire at night and they share stories and things like that. You can actually package it in a very modern way, and then the interest will come. When you try to present it in a very rigid form, which dharma actually isn't anyways, that is when you will see that a lot of deracination happens. And to some extent the deracination also happens because the parents abdicate from their responsibilities. So I think that is there. Definitely the revival of the temple as a social institution is very important. uh, how often, and if we honestly ask this question to ourselves, that local community in our neighborhood where we go, how many people do we know, who frequent that temple by their name or personally, and what they do? How many times do we form social relationships, friendships in the temple? A temple can actually be a place where you can form friendships, business networks, connections. That is how, through social reinforcement, you can actually help in dharma thrive, because it has to thrive, not it has to thrive through a community framework. There has to be a social validation, there has to be a social incentive for it to thrive. I think that is what is right now lacking. And also, as dharmics, while our philosophy and religion is deeply tied to nature, that doesn't mean that it cannot embrace technology. If you see today, there are e-hundis or digital hundis where people actually put donations, right? People use actually PayTM to donate money to the temple. Many of the larger temples, they also follow electronic ticketing. During the pandemic, there were digital pujas. People actually, there were live streaming of pujas. Things like this happened. So I think adopting technology as a part of your daily life is also a very important thing. There are quite a lot of apps now available which actually give you shlokas and all of that, what kind of practice you should do on a daily basis. Uh, Also, I think as part of the technology thing, I think we also need to have some kind of Hindu modern art and architecture. Like, if thinking out loud here, a sun temple, a Surya Mandir, should have modern Hindu art with solar collectors, harnessing solar energy, like Pavan Putra Hanuman. you know why can't a Hanuman temple have a small windmill, producing wind energy around it, where you harness those natural forces. That is like the biggest respect that you would be giving to the Surya Devta, when you kind of harness his energy and produce fuel, like things like that. So I think there is lot of potential that is required to be harnessed. And yeah, we need to look into those things. And one last thing, and this is something I was discussing with a friend recently. When obviously this would happen when temples get decontrolled. Temples can actually run creches, or what you call daycare services, where nannies who are dharmically trained can, when, because both the parents are working, they can actually teach the kid. It's a very intuitive way. See, that is the thing. The kid should not know that you are actually teaching something to him. It's imbibed in regular practice. When the process becomes so seamless, you don't realize how the wheels are moving, and you achieve what you wanted to achieve.
Thank
These are
you.
some of the
Thank
things
you
I could
very
think
much for your creative ideas, how to reach out to the people. But one of the things which we have also talked about, the parental responsibility. And Suraj, I'm coming to you with that, is that I think we must collectively, individually and collectively, must study Mahabharata and Ramayana. Because one of the things which is important is why we talked about Ukraine and Pakistan kind of a scenario is that Mahabharata and Ramayana doesn't say the war is forbidden. Dharma rakshati rakshata, you have to get up to fight for dharma. So war is not a forbidden item. But what is talked about throughout the lesson that we learn reading these texts is you do not leave anything unattended to, which is very important. Negotiation has to be followed till the end. And to that end, I recommend that everybody must study Mahabharata and Mahabharata, Gita, and Ramayana, because remember, these texts have one critical element which I'm very excited about. They do not disparage any character, but all they tell that every action of every great man or woman in the text had a consequence. Dhritarashtra paid the price for his decision. Everybody paid the price for or the consequence of his decision making. So coming back to as we are coming to the close of the show, if you have any questions, viewers, if you have any questions, please ask. We are doing the millennial conversation here, how to deal with that situation, coffee shop conversation. But how do we take this forward? So last thing would be that there are rules of dharma, for example, compassion, piety, truth, cleanliness, all these virtues. There are several virtues of dharma practices. I will go back to it. How do we implement it, and where do we draw the line?
I think
Suraj.
Indic made some really good points about how our families are becoming nuclear, and for me it was the same. Whatever, a lot of the dharma that I've learned apart from my own father, it's through my grandparents, right? That age-old custom, of kind of the grandparents reading out, whether it is the Gita, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, to their grandchildren, and them, watching, hearing from them, reading about them, and of course watching it on Doordarshan, which a lot of the country did during the during the late 80s and early 90s. That also really helped in terms of promoting that, imbibing the spirit of dharma. But the temple issue that again was mentioned was a very, very important thing. If you look at, for example, two religions, Christianity and Islam in India, right, or even other parts of the world, that's always not just a venue for prayer, or to kind of talk to their god, or to talk to something which is deeper than their own conscience, but it's also a meeting place of of community building, of exchanging business contacts, as Indic said, and really it's a community venue, which goes beyond just session there on a Friday or a Sunday to kind of pray to their god. And that was exactly what temples were, many years back, not centuries back. Temples were not just a meeting place to meet our gods, but it was literally a place to kind of learn as much of new things as possible. It was a fountainhead of knowledge, and of course of wealth as well, as we know through many temples, like the Padmaswami temple and many other temples across India and across the world. So that is one thing that is very important. The second thing, in fact, on a ironic note, I saw a tweet while we were speaking from Jaipur Dialogues itself, and this is what the tweet reads: UPSC should introduce a special paper on Indic studies, what we're talking about, to weed out the anti-national propaganda from coaching institutes. Do you agree? What are your thoughts? And that again is something that I think we hinted at as well, Vibhuti, is that UPSC or any public service examination, which millions of youngsters, millions of kids aspire to kind of get into and clear the exams. That is again a big bane in our system, especially post-independence, because we are thinking from a colonial point of view. We are reading scriptures, and we are reading out of papers, which again give a very Marxist way of life, not the Indic way of life, not the dharmic way of life. And that's again something that it really has to be sorted out. If along with what you mentioned, and these are important points about
end of the show. Thank you, Suraj. Coming to the end of the show, we have a minute left, and I want both of you to comment on this aspect, because we have talked about very sensitive issues: temples, freedom, and reasserting our way of life. My quick question is conversion of you and I to Islamic or Abrahamic faith, Christianity, is it a sin against God's original intent? 30 seconds. Suraj, you first, and Indic, you next.
One second, can Indic go first? I think there's a bit of connection issues.
Okay, Indic, you go ahead first. 30 seconds.
Sorry, I didn't get the question. What are you saying?
The question is very simple. We have been talking very sensitive issues, and one of the things is the religious conflicts that happen. The religious conflict is about conversion. So is conversion a sin against God's original intent?
So, now again, this is a chicken and egg question, because original intent, right? Like, who will decide what was the original intent? See, as far as like the righteousness is concerned, I think any form of force or coercion, for anyone to pursue any path, either through violence or otherwise, is not right. I think every individual should be free to choose their path. I don't think there should be any force or coercion. I think any form of force is contrary to what would be divine intent. So yeah.
Suraj, you've
just thrown a bouncer at the end, of the match. So no, I mean, as long as somebody converts out of his free will and without any coercion, as Indic said, or without any other aspects which influence the coercion, then I think it's perfectly fine. So if somebody is doing something which gives him or her inner peace and inner happiness, whether that is going back to your roots and reading about dharma or doing a ghar wapsi, or of course converting to any faith of their choice, I think it's perfectly fine, and it is you have to leave that to the concerned individual, because otherwise we will be embracing the blasphemy aspect which Abrahamics do, and that is something that I don't think any of us want to get into. We should not be bound to any book or bound to any set of doctrines that somebody has mentioned, which is written like thousands of years back. We should be free to do and practice whatever we want to do. So that's my take.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of you, all the viewers. Thank you for your support. Like, subscribe, press the bell icon. Subscribe to Jaipur Dialogues and Jaipur Dialogue USA, which is a baby in the field we are trying to grow. And thank you very much, Suraj and Indic. With these words, Satyamev Jayate, Jai Ram Ji ki.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.